Good morning, Annie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks for taking the time to join me. I know you're busy with all the great things being said about unlikely animals, so I really appreciate you taking some time to talk with me about it.
Thanks, of course.
Um, well, I guess I'll start. I've talked with my readers about this in my review. I mentioned it. The title is one of those, as much of a, if you've seen my account at all, a lot of my account is about animals. I'm an animal lover. I'm an animal owner you know, from guinea hens back when we had our Vermont farm, dogs, cats, horses, sheep, all of the things. But what's interesting is that I don't normally like animals in my books. And that is simply because I have usually found that they bring a lot of pain. It's always something sad.
Yeah.
But then there was enough buzz around the people whom I trust about your book, and so I went forward. I had an audiobook copy, and I don't think I turned it off. If
Oh,
like dinner, it was unbelievable. So and again, it had some things that I don't normally gravitate to: animals, a little bit of magic, ghosts, some otherworldly things,
hmm.
shall we say, and also laugh out loud funny, which is a very hard balance to strike. I think that it was so deep and tender in a lot of ways, but I normally read such heavy books that saying when people said it's laugh out loud funny, I was like, oh, again, I don't know if it's for me. So I'm going to ask you the tricky question of,
Is that because books that are described as funny you find not funny?
um, yes,
Okay.
sometimes, and sometimes
I'm,
funny
I'm
people
just
will say
curious.
like,
Yeah.
I'm not a rom-com reader. I would honestly rather not read, and I like eat books up, but I'd rather not read than read a rom-com. But like quirky funny, I find does work for me, and I'm finding that more and more. The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Um, I'm trying to think. Early Riser recently. I don't know. But so anyway, I did hear a couple of people say that it's quirky, funny. It's all these things, and it's going to go into my top reads of
Oh,
2022.
thank
So
you.
I've had people ask me to explain it, and I'm terrible at book summaries. So I'm going to give you the floor and say, tell us what Unlikely Animals is about, and then segue into what was the genesis of Unlikely Animals.
Sure. And I don't think it's your fault that you wouldn't want to describe this book because it's not an easy book to describe.
Yeah.
Although actually the New York Times yesterday did a very good job describing it. I thought.
I agree with that in a
In a
tight couple
tight space.
paragraphs.
I was like very proud of that writer. I thought that was really good. So the book is about it's a young woman named Emma Starling who comes home to take care of her father who is suffering from some sort of mysterious brain disease. But she has a slight magic healing touch in her hands. So she is not only coming home to take care of her father, but she has this like very sort of the nurse when picks up the baby on the first page says this baby cured my sciatica, so it's like this slight, but she has never known what to do with this healing touch, and she also knows at this point in her life, um, no matter how much healing touch she ever had, it's not enough to heal her father from this brain disease. She doesn't have like that sort of power. um, so the book is a lot about coming to terms with that situation, that she may have had a healing power, but it's not like, but her father is still going to die. And it's about their relationship, and then it's also about this town, Everton, New Hampshire, which is based on a real town, Newport, New Hampshire, and then it's heavily fictionalized in certain aspects. But there is a lot of real history in the book. And so the book came from, I was writing that story of a young woman come home to take care of her father. And then I was up visiting friends in Newport, New Hampshire. And we were driving along this road, and all of a sudden I look up, and there's this enormous yellow mansion. and the Yellow Mansion is like looks like a beautiful hotel. And I'm like, what's this place? And my friends had just moved to the area, so they didn't know. And I Googled, Newport, New Hampshire, huge Yellow Mansion, and it was a Gilded Age millionaire who had moved up there and knocked down the house he was born in, and then built this mansion. And then with all his millions, he decides what he wants to do is buy up 60 farms in the area, and then fence all that land in and ship in animals from all over the world and start it originally actually, and this isn't in the book, but it originally was not supposed to be a hunting park. He wanted all the animals in the world to come live harmoniously. But at the time, and you will laugh as a native New Englander, white-tailed deer had been hunted out of New England, but white-tailed deer love New England, so they brought white-tailed deer in, and though they just exploded. So that's when hunting started in the park. And they also had bison, and they had a lot of antelope. So I'm so interested as an animal lover, and just like this is cool history that I've stumbled across. And then I find out that the park is still there today. So my mind is sort of blown because it's 26,000 acres, which is like 3/5 the size of Washington,
Wow.
D.C. Like it's as big as Disney World, which is also a crazy amount of space, but the Disney
Yeah.
World is huge. Um, and and it's still there, and it's still fenced in, and it's owned by 25 anonymous millionaires that like each have a share in this place.
Mhm.
So I'm so like I just want to know more, but I don't really know how I would write about it at that point because I don't write historical fiction, so I don't really want to write about the Gilded Age guy. He was also like a mean, bad guy, and I'm more interested in people who have good in them, and I'm not sure how much good this man actually had in him. Um, and so, but I start going to the historical society in town, and then I just trying to figure out where this is going to take me. And then I find Ernest Harold Baines, who was a real life Dr. Dolittle who lived at the edge of the park from 1904 until his death in 1925. And he was the official naturalist for the park. And he was invited to live there. And then he had wild animals living in his house. He and his wife, who they had no children, but they had foxes, bear, deer, tons of little birds, like in and out of their cottage. And so now I'm like so interested and have to write about it. But I still wanted to write a book that was set in like now-ish. The book is ended up set in 2014.
Mhm.
Um, and so I Ernest Harold Baines appeared as a ghost in my first draft, and he is a ghost in the final draft. But there's many ghosts in the book, but he is the first ghost that came in the manuscript.
The ghosts were hilarious. the whole just their dialogue and just the way they fit into the story. Again, it's one of those things that's very difficult to describe to people. I'm like, you really have to experience it. But it is one of those. I feel like it falls into, well, your story about what the genesis of the novel really falls into the category of truth is stranger than fiction. I
Hmm.
mean, I feel like that's only something that could be born in, I mean, that could have been born in Vermont, something, oddball like that. And I say that in the nicest way as a New Englander. I'm not poking fun, but also as a as a new Texan, I feel like that's something you could see here too.
Well,
So
yeah, I mean they
that's,
have a lot of those hunting parks in Texas, but in
yep,
Texas they might get even stranger because with the warmer weather you can have more like
exotic animals.
exotic
Yeah.
animals. Whereas,
Yeah. I think this is where the whole tiger thing came out of. I can't even,
yeah,
whatever that tiger,
Tiger
story
King.
was, but yeah,
Yeah.
Tiger King. And that's like for real. But,
Yeah, this
um,
park is, I mean, and this is a little bit in the book, but this park is most, but also in the book, and in so this park, I spent a lot of time in this town, talked to a lot of people. Most people in the town have never been in this park,
how
and it
interesting.
is, someone said it's a black hole in my backyard that you have to know somebody to get in. So that was, I like the fictional possibilities are endless. But I did talk to someone about what animals are really in this park, and someone who was a member of the club, and he said it's somewhat exciting because they're not like there are elk in there, which are not New England, wild in New England, and then there are a lot of wild boar, and that is not a
That's we have that down here, like
yeah,
Louisiana and stuff like that.
yeah.
Wow. Well, that was not totally that. I'd read a little bit about your backstory, but not the whole thing. So that's really interesting. And as they say, you hear authors say there's a story on every corner. You know, there's
Oh yeah, yeah,
you just have to kind of figure out what you're gonna do with it. So
yeah.
and I also said in my review, this is really a book that captures the essence of place. So, in particularly New Hampshire, and like I said, New Hampshire is near. Both of my parents are from New Hampshire. I thought that you really provided a great slice of that, you know, quirky small town, incredibly interesting characters. And was that something was that conscious on your, you know, wanting to share a bit of? Are you from New Hampshire?
I'm from Massachusetts.
Okay, so am
So yeah, so New Hampshire is, I mean, but my parents, my grandparents had a house in Freedom, New Hampshire.
Okay.
So I spent like summers and all vacations in Freedom, New Hampshire.
Okay.
Um, and I also, we got married in Vermont. I went to graduate school in Vermont.
Okay.
So I have, um, Vermont and New Hampshire are different. I mean, I think people who haven't been there might assume they're the same, but they
So
are
different.
so
So
different.
different
Um,
politically, just the, you know, geographics of the White Mountains and the Green Mountains, and don't mix them up.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
oh, yeah,
even,
very
and one
different
thing
states.
I love of like a fun fact is that you can't, there are no billboards in Vermont. They're illegal. And then
Right.
billboards are all over New Hampshire. And
Oh, the live free or die thing is don't mess with it.
yeah. Um, and even though I love untouched nature, I also love billboards because there's so much comedy on them often. Like there's a billboard when the main character Emma is driving into town and it says like it's advertising snowmobiles and it says kids under 5 ride free. And that was just taken verbatim from a sign, which for
Yeah.
me, as a mom of a young toddler, I'm like horrified to think that anyone would put a
Yeah.
toddler on a snowmobile. But, you know, people make all sorts of decisions. And
Yep.
so I just think that's funny. But maybe other people are like, great, I'm going to take my 4-year-old on the snowmobile. Um, it seems to me like the equivalent of a motorcycle, but people also probably take
Yeah.
their young kids on
Well, when
motorcycles. So, so yeah, I've spent a lot of time in New Hampshire, but I am not from there. But so I mostly feel like I'm just writing about people. I don't think it's, um, I mean, my other book is set in Alabama,
mhm.
and I'm not necessarily trying to make like a Southern character or a New Hampshire character, but I am trying to make small town characters, and that is just like, you know, the when you pay attention to people in a small town, they all have their like strange little quirks. So every
Mhm.
character that I encounter, I'm trying to make as like well-rounded as possible. So trying to figure out like why they're so into Christmas. Like, what is it that, why is that woman always wearing the Christmas sweater? Is there a backstory there that I can add, even though we see her in one scene? Um, and I knew I wanted, my first book does not have a lot of characters, and I knew I wanted to write a book that was like grander in pretty much every way possible. So I wanted a lot of characters. I was very inspired by John Irving books. And so I wanted,
Love John
he
Irving.
has, yeah, I love John Irving.
My mom grew
And
up with John Irving. Small town
really?
story. My mom grew up in Exeter and knew him and dated him.
Oh,
How's that for a small town story?
oh my God. Oh, I
Yeah.
feel faint. I always call him my
Yeah.
boyfriend.
Oh, that's so funny.
And
Yeah.
now
No, and
I'm
he's got a
at,
new book coming out too this
I
fall.
know, in October, right? Or in the
Yep. Yes.
fall.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
No,
I'm
it's one of
excited.
those. My the funny family story is that my mother's mother always, whenever John Irving comes up, my grandmother, who lived to be 100, said, that boy grew up in my kitchen. And to which other people would say, what was going on in your kitchen? He writes some very off color stuff.
Yeah,
So
did you
that was
have the
funny.
dress mannequin upstairs?
Exactly. But I mean, Owen Meany and the Cider House Rules are two of my forever stack books.
Yeah, yeah. I love Garpin and Owen Meany are my favorite.
Oh yeah, Garp as well.
Yeah, I mean the I think the big four of the Cider House Rules, and then one more. What's the other one?
Of big
Hotel New Hampshire.
four.
Oh, Hotel New
Oh,
Hampshire is like
Hotel New Hampshire. Okay.
a little bit weird. I mean, if I were going to recommend them to
Some of
people,
them are
that would
so
be
long.
my, yeah, it's just a little weirder even for John Irving. But yeah, so he always has, all his characters are so rich and well-rounded, even when you don't meet them for very long. He has large cast of characters. So I wanted a novel like that. And so I guess I tried to take care with every character that they're never like a paper doll who just shows up and delivers the mail, that they have, something of their own personality to add. So I don't think a lot about like how to make a New Hampshire person or how to make an Alabamian, but how to make somebody who is like unique in some way, which does make me make a lot of characters like a little bit quirky, but that's how I actually experience the world, is I think through paying attention to people's um, quirks. Then you realize that people are a lot stranger than they appear at first if you're paying attention.
Oh, you're absolutely right. I don't think there was anything in this book that was like, that would never that would never happen. And as somebody who spent the majority of my life up there, and I was like, could absolutely meet these people,
Mm-hmm.
So it was very, very rich, and I could see it all. And um so I listen to a lot of audiobooks. I would never get through as much reading as I do without them. And I have always been, I love that audiobooks are now kind of more mainstream because,
Mm-hmm.
I know there are still the people that say that's not really reading. And I'm like, that I absolutely will take anybody to Matt who said that. I think that listening is such a special way to experience a book. Your narrators were incredible.
I
I
know.
wonder, have you heard it? Did you have any say in that as an author? Like, I know they're well-known narrators, or I had the name Kirby
Kirby Hayborn,
Haveborn,
yeah.
I've heard before, but Mark Bramhall, I'm sure I have, but it was so good. So I
Yeah.
wondered how that.
So yeah, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, although my husband listens to a lot of audiobooks. So I mean, we have a toddler, and I do a lot of drawing, and then he does a lot of running. So audiobooks are a big part of our reading experience. But so as I was writing, I thought a lot about the audio experience. So there were, even in small ways, like, there's one phrase in there that says, just do a C average job at teaching. And actually, that is advice that someone had given me when I started teaching. But it was what I had for a long time, because the actual advice was do a C-level job at teaching. And then I realized, oh, in the audiobook, that'll sound C-level and people will be confused because like the ocean, right?
Right.
So I read my book aloud a lot. So I was thinking about the audiobook. I was so worried about how they were going to do the birth and death dates,
Mm-hmm.
um, because if I read that aloud, for people who haven't read the book, that when a ghost talks, you get to see their birth and death dates, like it would be on a headstone. And so I was worried about how they would do that, but for someone who was a voice pro, like he just breezes through it and doesn't
Yeah.
stumble upon it at all. So they gave me a choice. They gave me a woman narrator, and then they gave me Mark Bramhall. And the woman narrator was very good, but and I think she was their top choice because the main character is a woman. But Mark Bramhall, I listened to him and I was like, he's exactly who I want. He's got a little bit of Clive in him, and he's got this
Yeah.
jaunty, like he's got the sense of humor. A lot of times when I hear other when I've heard, like, I think with my book, if you read it the wrong way, it's not funny. And so
I would
I
agree.
really wanted, the way that I read it aloud makes people laugh, but I think someone else could read it aloud and you would miss the humor entirely. So I trusted, just having listened to him. I listened to The Magicians. He did The Magicians, and that was a very
Okay.
good audiobook. But even just from the clips that they sent me, I was like, this guy can do it. So and then we had and then Kirby Hayborn they picked because he has a contrasting enough voice. He also has like a little bit of a, like, the sections he reads are supposed to be from 1925, and so I think he's done some stuff that his historical fiction. Um, and they when you what I was worried about with two male narrators is, would it be, with a female voice and a male voice, you can tell that there's a change. But their voices sound different enough that you can, that you're not confused. You're like, whoa, did his voice just drop or something? So yeah. So I have listened to the whole thing now. I didn't listen to the whole thing until I just had to go on a long drive, and I was like, I really want to hear the whole thing. Um, and so I listened to it, and yeah, it's it's an amazing
Hilarious.
audiobook. They did such a good job with it.
Hilarious.
So
They did. They did. And it's interesting because I've posed the same question to other authors, and they're like, oh no, I didn't have any say in it. So that's interesting that some, maybe, I don't know how that works, publishing houses, or, allow the author into that, and
yeah,
others don't. But
they allowed me. I don't know why. You know,
well, I think nobody knows the book as well. I suppose it could get sticky, and in terms of them feeling one way, but nobody knows the intended kind of feeling of the book
yeah,
better than you do. So there are, I, as an audiobook lover, know, and you know this too, that narration makes or breaks it, and often it breaks it. I
yeah,
mean, it does sometimes, and often when authors read their own book, that can be pretty rough. And so this was just so well chosen, and the way the humor came off, just exactly as I assume you intended it. I can still picture myself, like, I listen to it again, I'd be walking around and I'd just be like, this is great. It brought me a lot of
very
joy. It
happy.
brought me a
Yeah.
lot of joy. And I've told a lot of people, I said in my review, if you are wondering where to branch into audiobooks, here's a book to do it with.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So, but I want to segue. So continuing with the theme, I have to read this because it's I'm going to read a quote. I said, I read your essay, which was titled The Importance of Reading Aloud as Adults. So if you guys are interested, Annie's got a website, Annie Hartnett. Is it anniehartnett.com?
Yeah. Yeah.
And first of all, it's a wonderful website. It's got a lot of your essays, and this is one of them. But I think reading this essay article, it tapped into why I love audiobooks so much. I love to be read to. There's no experience like it, I think. And so I said, I'm quoting Annie here, as adults, reading aloud to one another is something we think we might have grown out of. But that's only because we've forgotten how intimate and cozy it is to be read to, or to read aloud to someone who listens. It's a simple, low maintenance way to connect. And if you can tell a good story, I now believe you can win anyone over, even the most skeptical of listeners. So that touched me on so many levels. I was like, wow, I totally kindred spirits, because I try to explain why I love audiobooks and tell people like, I know people who will do nonfiction, but just can't do fiction. And to me, it's no different than when you were a child and one of your parents, your grandparents read to you. When it's good, it elevates elevates the reading experience, because we get sick of our own voices, right, in our heads sometimes. And so obviously this is that you feel somewhat similarly.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't connected it so much to audiobooks, but certainly that is where my whole love of reading and stories came from. And the essays about my next door neighbor, Mrs. Chris, who was, her children were grown when I was a kid, and so she started a reading club in for me and two other girls. And every Wednesday after school, she would have us over for cookies and juice, and would read to us. And we read like Mary Poppins and Mr. Popper's Penguins and The Hobbit, and then we start. Eventually, she started a like write your stories club, and so that's where I wrote my first stories. And she is still around, and I'm going to see her next week to sign her 4 copies of her book. So I mean, she's the best. But yeah, I think you're right that audiobooks, it does make you feel there's like a certain amount of, I mean, especially if you're, um, I don't know. I guess it doesn't matter what you're doing necessarily, but it does make you feel like a certain amount of caretaking that is going on. And I think Mark Bramhall does that. I mean, he's an older guy, so the grandfather voice is, and I
He's
wanted
got
that
it in
because that
spades.
is,
He's
yeah,
absolutely got it.
yeah,
He's perfect.
yeah, yeah. And
Well,
I
that's
think for the narrators, yeah. I mean, I'm very happy with it. So I'm glad you like it too.
absolutely. I loved it. And so, we've talked about how laugh out loud funny, quirky, all of that. But this book doesn't shy away from some very dark, real life issues, including these no spoilers. You read, the opioid crisis, which is, someone who still has family in New Hampshire. I mean, ravaged certain towns in New Hampshire, and I mean New England, the whole, but for sure. New Hampshire, and also as an adult child dealing with an aging parent. But you balance, and I said this in my review too, that's a fine balance between that, laugh out loud, funny, quirky, and like lighthearted experience with an audiobook to those darker, real. But like I feel it blends so well because I'm like, if that's not life, sometimes if you didn't
Yeah.
laugh, you'd cry.
Hmm.
So I just wanted to, I guess it's not really a question as much like little round of applause for you. You did that so
Oh,
well
thank
with
you.
and I guess, was that conscious? Did you want to kind of highlight were those 2 issues important to you and you wanted them included, or did it just kind of happen
I mean,
organically?
I I did not I didn't I with both my books, I don't set out to write, you know, happy books, but I have a very wry sense of humor, and that just comes out naturally that I can't. So I start with the dark thing, and then I ended up writing the humor because humor comes out to me in dialogue because that's how I find that people talk, and are making their way through the hard things. And then I get to love my characters so much, and then I want to take care of them. So I think I'm always writing stories of healing in some way. And this book, I wanted to write it so much about second chances, and the way that I wanted to write a book with a big finish, like a John Irving book, where there's some sort of miracle, although it's not the miracle that you think is. I mean, I'm not trying to spoil anything, but it's that there's some sort of second chance. And I wanted that to be a theme in the book. So that did lend it to end up being a more hopeful book. But I don't like I don't really enjoy um, movies or books that are, too happy, because it's not the way that I experience the world, or the things that make me laugh. I mean, back to John Irving, he does better than anyone at a mixture between like the truly horrific and the true like guffaw, like Peter Pan's funny. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so that for me is where I find that my fictional interests live, both in my own work and in other people's work, is how to and that's, I guess, why what I feel like I have to add too is making sense of the world through humor, and a town that really, like, sometimes I just feel this way, that the ship is sinking, but like we can refuse to let it sink, or we can laugh as it sinks, because what else can we do? So I think that is probably how all my books from, from my first book, Rabbit Cake, to this one, and hopefully to many, many more, will be the dark comedy, because that's my personality. And that's sort of my outlook on life.
Got you. Well, and on the John Irving, the segue, that he's really relevant again. I reposted his Cider House Rules with everything going on in the news with, abortion and everything. Like his books are always a good read, but that's especially relevant right now. I've reread Owen Meany too many times to count.
Yeah. And he wrote an essay about it a couple years ago about Cider House Rules, saying like he did not intend this book to still be relevant now.
Yeah.
It should have like aged out, but
no,
it did not.
Unfortunately not. So I know this is, and you kind of hinted at it. I know this can be a taboo question, and you don't have to answer it. But are you writing again?
Yeah, I'm actually I'm working on a new novel. And I've always wanted to write a road trip novel, so it's a road trip book about a older man and a younger boy, and they hit the road with a cat. So it's another like.
Have you traveled with a cat or many cats? I don't recommend it.
Yeah, no, traveling with
I'd rather travel with horses.
Yeah, the cat is going to be a problem for their
hotels and cats don't go well.
Yeah. So I'm working on that, and then I'm also working on a book of essays about creativity and motherhood, and sort of where those things intersect and where they don't. And also, yeah, so I'm because I've found that writing about my life actually is suddenly more interesting to me than it ever was before. And maybe that's because I haven't gotten to talk to people enough in the past couple of years. So I don't get to tell the stories that I want to be telling about, the funny thing that happened to me. Yeah, I've started writing about my life for the first time.
Memoir is I'm not a big nonfiction reader, but I love memoir and essays. And so I would be first in line for yours, because I love the essays on your website. I really enjoyed reading those.
I was thinking about it, and I hadn't thought about this more. I would not want to read my own audiobook, and I know they always want memoirists to read their own audiobook, but I'd prefer not to.
Yeah, it depends. Memoir is much better than a fiction reader, a fiction author reading their fiction. I've had a couple recently where I thought that did not go well. I think sometimes it does, but memoir is seems quite different. Not always, but
yeah. I don't know. I guess obviously that's a long way off, but I love, actors doing it because they're trained in it, that's totally their talent. So
totally agree. Okay, last question is, and you have alluded to this, we know John Irving, when you go to a bookstore, when you're going to recommend a book, who do you like to pick up? Who are you thrilled when a new book comes out by?
So I was a bookseller for years. So he has blurbed both my books, and I've never met him, but I love his work. And even if he had never done me the honor of blurbing, I love Kevin Wilson. So Kevin Wilson is a favorite. He's so funny, and also doesn't shy away from darkness, but has like big-hearted stories and really loves his characters and really this balance of like, I want dark things to happen, but I also want everyone to be okay. That's what I find in a Kevin Wilson book. And then I love also Rufi Thorpe, who has become, she was not a friend of mine, and she has become a friend of mine. And she's also a big John Irving fan, and she does not shy away from violence or humor. And I think her books are wonderful.
Okay. That's good to know. I love hearing what's on what's on your nightstand sort of thing. So, all right. Well, I'm going to close out, I'll stop recording, but please stick around at the end for you and I. But I know I have so many friends who said, I'm going to experience this on audio because of you. And I think they'll be thrilled to hear more about the backstory with that. And we really appreciate you taking this time.
Oh, well, thank you for having me.
Okay.